I picked up the pen before she could hand it to me. That's how I knew everything had changed. The teller, a young woman with a name tag that said Courtney, was looking at me, not at my son. She slid the form across the counter, slowly, the way people do when they're not sure you're going to reach for it. But I reached for it. I held it. And I did not sign it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to where this really started, because it didn't start at the bank. It started on a Tuesday in October, when my son showed up at my door with a casserole dish and a smile I hadn't seen in 11 years. I live alone now. Have for 3 years, since my husband passed. His name was Warren, and he was the kind of man who fixed things before they broke and never once made me feel like a burden for asking. When he died, he left me the house, a modest savings account, and the strange, hollow feeling of being the only person left who remembered our particular version of things. My son. I'll call him my son because that's what he is, though some days it takes effort to say it warmly. Lives about 40 minutes away. He has a wife, 2 kids. I see at Christmas and sometimes Easter, and a business that has always been, as far as I can tell, just about to take off. Warren used to say that about him. He's almost there, June. He's almost there. Yoon was an optimist. I am not. After Warren died, my son called more often for a few months. That's normal. Everyone does that, the dinners, the check-ins, they'll let me know if you need anything. But by the following spring, things had settled back to the usual rhythm. A call on my birthday. A text on Mother's Day with a photo of the grandkids. That was fine. I had my own life. I had my garden and my neighbor Claudette and my Thursday morning book club and more peace than I'd had in a long time. Then October came, and so did he. He was standing on my porch with a Tupperware of chicken and rice, wearing that smile, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not warmth, something more like alertness. I'd just been thinking about you more lately, he said. I thanked him for the chicken. He came back the following Sunday. Then the Sunday after that. He started calling midweek to ask about my appointments, my blood pressure, whether I was keeping up with the yard. He offered to help me figure out my investment accounts, said the interface had changed and the new system could be confusing. I told him I managed fine. He said he just wanted to make sure I wasn't paying too many fees. I called Claudette that night and told her what was happening. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, June, when did he last come around before October? I thought about it. Easter, I said. That's what I thought, she said. I want to be fair to him. I have always tried to be fair to him. He had a difficult adolescence. Warren and I went through some hard years when he was a teenager, and I know those years left marks on all of us. He is not a bad person. I believe that. But I have lived long enough to know that good people can do bad things when they are afraid, and my son has always been afraid of running out of money. Even when there was enough, he was afraid there wasn't. In November, he started talking about my will. Not directly. He doesn't do things directly. He mentioned a news story about an elderly woman whose estate had been tied up in probate for years because she hadn't updated her documents. He mentioned a colleague whose mother had been taken advantage of by a financial advisor. He mentioned, in passing, that it might be good for me to have a family member with access to my accounts, just in case something happened. Just in case what? I asked. He shrugged. You know, just in case you got sick. Or confused. I looked at him across my kitchen table. He was drinking the coffee I had made. He was wearing the sweater I had given him for Christmas 2 years ago. I'm not confused, I said. Of course not, he said. I just mean, things happen. Things happen. Things happen. I have been watching things happen my entire life. I know exactly what he meant. In December, he brought his wife. She is a pleasant woman who does not look at me when she is agreeing with what my son says. She brought a pie. We ate it, and then over the dishes she told me about a trust, a living trust, she called it, that her own father had set up, and how much simpler everything had been when he passed. How it had protected the family. how it was really the most loving thing a parent could do. I said I would think about it. She said they knew a wonderful attorney. I said I would think about it. That night I called my own attorney, a woman named Patricia. Not the Patricia in my past, a different one. And I told her what was happening. She listened the way good lawyers do, without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "Come in this week. Let's update everything first, before anyone else schedules anything." I went. We updated my will, my power of attorney, my healthcare directive. My son was not named in any of them. I named Claudette for healthcare. I named my nephew, Oliver, Warren's sister's boy, the one who calls me every other Sunday just because, for everything else. Patricia told me to say nothing about this to my son. I said nothing. In January, my son told me he had made an appointment with his attorney. "Our attorney," he said, "the one Sandra uses. He specializes in estate planning." I said, "When is it?" "February 3rd, he said. "I thought we could all go together." I said, "All right." He looked surprised that I agreed so easily. That was the first mistake he made, assuming my agreement was the same as compliance. The office was downtown, on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like carpet cleaner and old heat. The attorney, a man in his mid-50s, navy suit, practiced smile, had a folder on the desk when we arrived. My son sat to my left. His wife sat to his left. I sat across from the attorney, and I folded my hands on my lap and I waited. The attorney began to explain the trust. He used words like streamlined and protective and peace of mind. He slid papers across the desk to me, and I began reading them. It was quiet in the office. The kind of quiet where the carpet absorbs everything. I got to page 4. There it was. A clause about cognitive incapacity. A clause that said that if I were deemed by a medical professional or by a named family representative to be unable to manage my own affairs, the management of all assets held in the trust would pass immediately to my son. I did not look up from the paper. "Who determines that I'm unable to manage my affairs?" I asked. The attorney said, "There's a process. A doctor's assessment." "And who chooses the doctor?" I asked. There was a pause. My son shifted in his chair. Then he turned to the attorney, not to me, and said, "She's been having some difficulty lately with the paperwork side of things, the financial accounts especially. She doesn't always understand how these documents work." He said this as if I were not in the room. I sat with that for a moment. I let it sit. Then I set the papers down on the desk, very evenly, and I looked at the attorney and I said, "I'd like to see an alternate draft, one without that clause." The attorney looked at my son. I said, "I'm asking you, not him." The attorney cleared his throat. He said that would be a significant structural change to the document, that the clause was there as a protective measure. "Protective of what?" I said, "My son is the one who benefits if I'm declared incapacitated. He's also the one who would choose the doctor. I don't find that protective. I find it convenient." The room was quiet again. Different quiet this time. My son said, "Momte." I said, "I'm not finished." I had been finishing sentences for 68 years. I was not going to let this be the one that ended for me. I told the attorney that I had already met with my own counsel, that my documents were current, and that I was not in need of a trust drafted by an attorney I had never met, recommended by a family member who stood to benefit directly from its terms. I told him I would be happy to discuss estate planning with him at a future date if I decided to engage his services independently. I thanked him for his time. Then I picked up my coat and my bag, and I stood up. My son stood up too. He looked pale. "You had your own lawyer?" he said. "I do," I said. "I've had her for 11 years. His wife had stopped looking at the table. She was looking at me now. "When did you?" my son started. "Before you made this appointment," I said. "I had a feeling this might be necessary." We walked to our separate cars in the parking garage without speaking. I watched the elevator doors close between us. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before starting the engine. I want to be honest about what I felt, because I think people expect either triumph or heartbreak, and it wasn't quite either. It was something closer to grief, mixed with clarity. The grief was old. It had been there for years, maybe since the Easter when he didn't come, or the birthday when the text came, 3 days late, or the Sunday phone call that stopped happening. The grief was knowing that the person in that office, that careful, calculating person who had turned toward the attorney instead of toward me, that was my son. Not a stranger. Mine. The clarity was something different. The clarity was understanding, maybe for the first time, that I did not have to protect him from the consequences of that. I called Oliver that evening, told him everything, because he deserved to know. He was quiet, the way his father used to be, taking it in before he spoke. Then he said, "Aunt June, do you want me to come this weekend?" I said yes. He drove 3 hours and we sat in the kitchen and he went through everything with me again. The documents, the accounts, the access points. He didn't try to take anything over. He just wanted to understand, and he asked questions the same way Warren used to ask questions, which is to say he listened to the answers before he formed the next one. At one point, he put his hand on top of mine on the table and said, "You're the sharpest person I know." I said, "Tell that to the attorney." He laughed. First real laugh I'd had in weeks. My son called 4 days later. He said he'd had time to think, that he felt the meeting had gone sideways, but he hadn't meant to make me feel like he was going around me. He used phrases like, coming from a place of love and just wanted to help and didn't realize how it looked. I let him say all of it. Then I said, "I believe you didn't mean to hurt me, but I need you to understand what you did. You sat in that room and told a stranger that I don't understand things. You were sitting 3 feet from me when you said it." He was quiet. I said, "That's not love, that's management." More quiet. I told him I was not closing the door, but I was putting a lock on it. If he wanted to come to Sunday dinner, he was welcome. But we would not be discussing my finances or my documents or my capacity to manage either. If he came to see me, he needed to come to see me, not what I was leaving behind. He said he understood. I don't know if he did. That part I can't control. Claudette came over the next morning. I made coffee and we sat by the window where you can see the bird feeder Warren put up the year before he died. The cardinals were back. They always come back. Those cardinals. Every winter. Like they've decided this yard is worth returning to. She said, "How are you actually feeling?" I thought about it honestly. The way you only can with someone who has known you long enough that pretending would be insulting. Like I've been carrying something very heavy for a long time, I said, and I finally set it down. But my arms still ache from it. She nodded. She understood that. We drank our coffee and watched the birds and didn't fill the silence with anything it didn't need. There are things I know now that I didn't let myself know before. I know that my son sees me as something to be managed, and I know that didn't start in October. It started a long time ago, the first time I smoothed something over to keep the peace, the first time I let a dismissive comment pass because it was easier. Those small concessions accumulate. I let them accumulate. Some of that is mine to own. But I also know this. Being old does not mean being unintelligible. It does not mean your signature belongs to someone else, or your judgment needs to be ratified by a person who is afraid of losing the thing you earned. I built this life. Warren and I built it together, and then I have been building it alone for 3 years. The house, the garden, the Thursday book club, the careful savings, the doctor I chose, the attorney I chose, the nephew I trust. I built all of it because I am someone who thinks before she acts. Someone who pays attention, someone who reads page 4. The pen was on that desk waiting to be used against me. I picked it up first. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any grand way, just the quiet, honest kind of thinking you do when the dust is settled and you finally have time to trace the lines backward. What happened at that attorney's office didn't begin in January. It began years earlier. In all the small moments, I decided to let things go. A dismissive comment at dinner. A birthday call that came late or not at all. A conversation where I sensed I was being managed rather than heard, and I chose not to say so because it was easier to keep the peace. I am not blameless in how things got to where they got. Every time I smoothed something over, I was teaching him, without meaning to, that I could be smoothed over. That's not his fault entirely. That's mine to own. But I also think about what changed, and why it changed when it did. I had spent so long making myself smaller, easier, quieter, less inconvenient, that I think he genuinely forgot I was a whole person with a whole history and a mind that still worked exactly as it always had. He didn't wake up one day and decide to deceive me. He woke up one day and realized he had never really had to reckon with me at all. That's what I had allowed. And at some point, what you allow becomes what people expect. The decision I made, to call Patricia before he ever scheduled that appointment, to sit across from that attorney and ask the question no one expected me to ask, that decision didn't come from anger. It came from something older and quieter than anger. It came from knowing myself. From 68 years of paying attention, of reading fine print, of noticing when a room shifts. Warren used to say I had a gift for understanding what wasn't being said. I never thought of it as a gift. I thought of it as just paying attention. But it saved me. I think about Oliver driving 3 hours on a Saturday, sitting at my kitchen table, going through every document without once trying to take anything over. He asked questions and listened to answers. He put his hand over mine and said I was the sharpest person he knew. That kindness. That uncomplicated, undemanding kindness, that was what real love looks like when it has nothing to gain. I think the hardest thing I've had to accept is that love and loyalty don't automatically pass through blood. They're built, slowly, through showing up, through listening, through being the kind of person who drives 3 hours just because someone needs another set of eyes and a reason to laugh. My son and I are still in contact. I don't know yet what we are building, or whether we're building anything at all. But I know now that I will not be managing that uncertainty by making myself smaller. I will be managing it by being exactly who I am, the woman who reads page 4, who calls her own attorney first, who picks up the pen before someone else can use it against her. That's not stubbornness. That's integrity. It took me a long time to stop apologizing for it.